Well, good morning, family. It's uh it's the end of a week. It's Friday. My guest today was meant to be Peter Bergman, researcher from Columbia Teachers College. But something came up, and that's the way that things are these days. So he's not able to join me. Will probably join me for a future show, and has my thoughts, my prayers, and my wishes, which always sounds so trite when people say that now, for his family. And like all of us, we're having scheduling issues with being at home, having children who are supposed to be in school but aren't, kids that are at home, and families having to balance life in this new era. So, what I want to do is just a quick weekly roundup. It's been quite a bit an eventful week and an interesting week. And if I'm being honest, the most interesting thing about this week that happened was this being called out by someone online who disagrees with me on policy and calling me an Uncle Tom. And the whole Uncle Tom thing is weird just in itself, because usually it's an epithet that means somebody has sold out, somebody is doing something just for the money or just for the pleasing of the masters. To be subservient to white masters is really what it is. And in the world of education, politics, this is kind of a rampant claim because education philanthropies fund education nonprofits. Those nonprofits get involved with policy stances that are controversial. In education, you have different stances or different positions, I should say, like school choice, for instance, like the idea that schools should have to, uh, they shouldn't have to be done in one way, meaning just by districts or just by the state-run schools. There should be many different kinds of schools. Families should have access to many different types of educational opportunities. No two kids are alike. Families have different needs. We are in a society that is pluralistic, so that basically means that we should have different kinds of schools to serve different kinds of purposes. And that seems like it's not a big deal, just obvious that we should have more choices. But the moment that you say that, you are bumping up against a large number of special interests. And I hate to call it that because there's a long history of calling things special interest when you want to diss them as not being valid or legitimate. Sometimes it's just people's vested interest in policies going the right way. But in education, it's a $750 billion enterprise. And we have to be clear about that. Anytime you talk about moving anything from right to left and you talk about changing the way that schools are funded or staffed or the way that they get reimbursed for work that they do, like special education, you are almost always going to be bumping up against somebody who wants to challenge whatever it is you're proposing, because what you're proposing has a material effect on their lives. I get that. I'm not naive. Many of the things that I support are exactly those type of issues that the institution or the establishment will find to be threatening. It's a threat to say that the money of a child should follow the child wherever they go, whether that be a charter school, a magnet school, a non-district school, a non-public school, an alternative school of some sort. It is literally threatening just to say that one thing, because if a child moves to a charter school, the money moves with that child. If the child moves back into a district, the charter school loses that money that goes with that child. And what many people will tell you is that there just shouldn't be any competition in education. We should just form a system where all kids get what they need. Man, this light is really bright. It has me feeling like I'm, being investigated or something. So I get the mechanics and the economics of the proposals that I support. I don't support them because I'm into policy. I don't support them because it's political or it's ideological. I support them because I'm thinking about the family first. I'm thinking about the child. I'm thinking about the student, what is best for them. And in my mind, in an optimal situation, every child would find a seat in a place that is just right for them. Whatever their needs are, whatever it is that would be best for them to learn, whether that be STEM or the basics or any of those things. Um, I actually believe in my heart of hearts that we should make sure that we do everything we can so that those kids find their way into the right surroundings, into the right buildings. So this week, when I get the millionth time that someone calls me out and says, well, you're funded by billionaires, so you're just paid to say these things. It's a claim that I hear over and over and over again. And it never, I think, lands the way on my side where I treat it seriously enough, because I think on the other side, that really means something to them. The fact that that I'm a nonprofit executive, that I have a salary, that I'm paid at all, that I work for a living, and that I have ideas and opinions that drive the work that I do. It doesn't seem all that incongruent for me. I didn't grow up ever believing that having a job was bad, for instance. I never grew up with any idea that doing well in life was bad. And as a matter of fact, I grew up thinking that if you could do work every day that is meaningful to you, and you are able to do it as your full-time work, you are seriously blessed. Because so much of my life, so many of the things that I had to do in life for work were service work, or things that I wouldn't choose to do. I didn't choose to be a prep cook. I didn't choose to clean hotels. I didn't choose to do retail in every kind of store and retail outlet. I didn't choose any of that. And in the year 2000, when I started doing social services work, that was the first time in my life that I ever felt like I wasn't making much money, but every day I was happy because I was serving. Every day I was working directly with people that needed help, and that actually taught me a lot. I was able to be of use. I was able to be of service. I was able to do more than push paper around. Many of the jobs that I had previous to that, I could do a whole 8 hours of work and go home and feel as though I had done nothing. Right. It got very depressing at the end of the 1990s. I had a job in a corporate environment at a very low level position, like a seriously low level position. And all I could think about all the time was, to get up a grade level in pay. It was the rat race type of thinking. If I was at a level 7, if I get to a level 9, I'll just I can't wait to get there, because then life will be great. I can remember at one point making $7 or $7.50 an hour and thinking to myself, man, those people who make $10 an hour must just have it really easy. Like, if I ever make $10 an hour, man, things are going to be great for me and my kid. And of course, that isn't true. Like with every raise that you get, if you are not doing personally meaningful work, if you're not doing work that somehow feeds your soul, it will have a price. You'll have a price to pay for it. My price to pay was at the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s. I completely wiped out. The job that I was doing, it was the best I had been paid up until that point. I had the best insurance that I had ever had up until that point. I even had like profit sharing. Even in my low level position, in December, I think it was, I would get a little check, that would be like, hey, the company did well this year. Here's your, I don't know, like $1,100 or something, which, might as well have been $1 million to me then. But this is the thing. It was the best I had been doing up until that point, and I was doing it because I had to, because I had a mouth to feed. I had rent to pay. I had things I had to do. So if you want to talk about doing something for the money, back then I really was doing something for the money. But this is the way that God works in my life. I don't know how God works for you. This is the way that God works in my life. At the time, I was also doing a job ministry at my church. I went to a very large church, a mega church, and they had several ministries in the church to help people who had different sorts of needs within the church, and so that everybody involved, all of the members, would be able to find whatever help that they would need in that. And the most fulfilling work that I had during that time was helping people update their resumes, help them find work, help them find jobs. And during that time, I learned a couple of things. I learned, number one, I knew how to help people find work and get jobs. I also learned what X'd out people, got them not to be, to disqualified people from certain work and certain jobs, what kept people trapped in certain parts of the workforce, things that they hadn't learned, things that they were incapable of doing, certifications that they didn't have, degrees that they were missing. All of that stuff became to me the barriers that I had to help people get over, including myself. It was kind of ironic that I was helping people find work when in actuality, the day work that I was doing was not meaningful, but this work that I was doing through the ministry was really, really, really fulfilling. I can remember thinking to myself, and this is the late 90s, if I ever could do just this, if I could help people every day, if I could just use what the little bit that I know for good to help people find their way in a really kind of just rough economy, that would be my definition of making it. And it's funny when you put something like that out in the universe and you start thinking about it enough that it starts to become real. Now, I didn't think that this was possible. I thought that I would be working low wage, low growth, low opportunity jobs for my whole life. I felt some pride in it. I mean, I was good as a prep cook. I thought I was. I mean, if you ever get good with a knife and you're cutting pineapple and onions for 8 hours all day long, you have to get pretty good at it and have some pride in what you can do after a while and how well you can cook in those things. But here's what happened. So this is how God arrives in my life and at this point in my career. I got a call out of the blue from a social worker at a local family services agency, Jewish family services agency. So I would have never been on the radar. That would have never been in my mind to connect with this particular group of people or any of the work that they do. But this social worker came out and visited me, sat down and said, like, listen, this is why I called you and this is why I want to talk to you. You helped one of our clients get a job who we just actually didn't think was employment ready, just didn't really have, just wasn't ready for work. And we want to know how you did it. And this was like many other times in my life, I will meet a person and that person will be the door opening, the gateway to something that I haven't seen. And this meeting, her name was Cindy. This meeting with Cindy was my gateway. She was my door opener to social services. And she just really did want to know, how did you help this person find work? And what was interesting to me back then was, even then I had an idea that disabilities aren't really disabilities the way that people think that they are. They're just mismatched for certain type of work. So the person that we were talking about had very severe OCD issues and probably wasn't the most sociable person and probably wouldn't succeed in interviews. I mean, she was straight up with me. The stuff that she would say in interviews that she would tell me about, I would crack up. I would laugh so hard that tears would be coming out of my eyes because I couldn't believe she was just that straight up and that brisk. And I actually loved it. But it turned out that her particular profile was perfect for certain types of work. We got her in and I don't want to give away too much information, but we got her in a job where her OCD was a blessing, not a curse, like a job where she would excel more than everybody else. And that was all I could tell Cindy when she asked me about it. When she said, how did you help her find work? I said, this is how I do it, and we went through the process. And she said, well, have you ever thought about doing social services? And I thought, well, no. I mean, that sounds great, but that sounds like something where people go and get master's degrees, and they go through a lot of qualification processes. And here I am, a service working guy. I don't know how I would do that sort of thing. But the short story is, I got hired at Jewish Family Services in St. Paul. It was the door opening to an entirely different life. It was the end of my life in jobs that I was doing just for the money. It was the end of my life as a service person who worked in careless, mindless work that I struggled really hard to find myself in it, and my pride in it. But and it was the opening of a new career. And this is 2000. So this is 20 years ago. This is 2 decades ago. And I made a lot less money. I'm going to be very clear. It was very much a paycheck to paycheck situation. I had health benefits, but they weren't as good as they were when I was at the company, I'll call it. And it just wasn't as rewarding in pay and those things, but I was happy every day. The work itself was the best work that I could imagine doing. I felt blessed doing it. I worked in an environment where it was very therapeutic, and there was a lot of respect for people in poverty, and they were who you worked with all day long. So I traded out corporate people for real people. And I don't want to say that corporate people aren't real people, but I was working with moms and parents, and we could have real conversations throughout the day. And I feel like I excelled in that work. I went on to work from there. I went on to work at Goodwill Easter Seals, and I felt like I had a knack for helping people with disabilities find work, and people who had serious and persistent issues were my particular soft spot when it came to helping people find work. That is what I did. I mention all this just to say I think it's good background, it's good information, that I wasn't like some lab-created Negro made by reformers in some laboratory where you create like corporate reformers. And I wasn't somebody's slave, and I didn't come to the ideas that I have the wrong way or in any type of way that wasn't valid by my own personal life's experience. And I think it's very important for school reformers, especially school reformers of color, to make clear what their story is, so that other people don't write your story for you, so that other people don't tell the world what they think you should be seen as, like what your narrative should be. And my story is one of having done work just for the money because I had to, transitioning to work where I wake up every day, even today, even now, even being able to share this with you in this way that we're talking right now, that is more than personally meaningful. It became a calling at some point. I went from helping people with direct services every day to challenging systems and government systems, including workforce development, welfare, county services of all different kinds and different levels, housing, and education. These were the issues that I worked on when I worked with families. And all of those issues together were part of the case notes that I did every day. It was my learning system that I learned over years. It was the experience that I had that taught me things over the years. And that naturally evolved into some ideas that I had. I knew that in my own personal life that the lack of an education was a barrier to many things, many opportunities. You just won't get certain jobs because you can't put a certain thing on your application. I found myself helping people fill out applications to Arby's and Subway and Burger King, who had graduated from high school and who could barely finish these applications that I would help them with error-free. And I knew what that felt like. I knew what that was about, but it did hit me at some point. You're spending 12 years with somebody. It's obvious that you have here that you graduated from high school, and you're not able to complete an application to Subway that's error-free. And oh, by the way, even if you get the job at Subway, this is not going to help you feed a kid, or in some cases, multiple kids. So this is the low end. Like my level of what would have been success for the people that I was working with would not have been Subway. It would have been a level up. But with the educational background, I got to see firsthand what X's people out. of opportunity, alienates people from opportunity. And I transitioned to thinking about this as a workforce problem to thinking about it as an education and preparation problem. And it just was like, I think of the world in very simple terms. So like my thinking back then is you should be able to graduate after 12 years in an institution with people who are paid to professionally prepare you for the world. You should graduate 12th grade capable of doing something. And that something that you should graduate capable of doing should be poverty ending work, not poverty continuing work. And what I know about food service, service work, service industry work, highly feminized occupations, is that oftentimes they are poverty sustaining work at best. They're not poverty ending work. And I'll give you an example of how something like that played out. In Minnesota, for instance, and I've said this before in part of the setup for my former nonprofit, the Wayfinder Foundation, this is part of my ministry that I would say to people is pay attention to the structures of things. In Minnesota, for instance, we have what I consider to be a very generous social safety net. We have a very, we have a well-organized civic system and social system and system for social supports. I have at times have joked that we're the Silicon Valley of health and human services. But we treat the genders differently. So many of the occupations in Minnesota, if you drop out of them as a male, the highly male-dominated occupations, you go into the workforce system, like the unemployment system. And the things that you get when you are in the unemployment system are really supportive of you getting on to your next job. And they're more than supportive. If you drop out of an industry where that industry itself, for instance, is dying, you get dislocated worker funds, like funds to be tooled up to do something different. Oh, you poor dear, you've been unemployed. Let us help prepare you for the next thing. If you are a mom, and what we found was that 80% of the people coming into our welfare system, which is called MFIP, but it's our welfare system, what we found is that something like 80% of them were workers. They actually were people that were working. So this idea that the people on welfare were somehow just lazy or didn't want to work, they were workers. So let's just keep that in mind first. They were workers in highly feminized occupations, which includes things like food service and CNA work, low-end healthcare work, those things that you don't get paid much to do, but are really taxing on your body and really hard work. And when they would drop out of the workforce system, they would drop into the welfare system instead of the unemployment system. So we would take the men one direction, not on purpose, but just de facto because they were coming out of male-dominated institutions that had unemployment. We would take women who were families, they had kids who were dropping out of feminized occupations and put them in a different system. And the way that we treated those two groups of people was completely different. With the males and the male-dominated things, it was like everything we could do to help them become a breadwinner. Again, training, more access to education, more access to funds to be training, better programs, like longer length of programs that they could attend. On the welfare side, it was a different attitude. You weren't seen as a worker, you were seen as a problem, lazy, and think about all the stereotypes of women that you consider the worst, and that's what was happening. And I thought that the only thing that could interrupt that was, I thought more than one thing could interrupt it. Number one, I thought it could interrupt it to make sure that we treated those two groups of people the same, that we just, put this before public people and make them answer for it. So some activism around it. But the education piece was really important to me because those highly feminized occupations were feeding on low-income women being undereducated and not having the ability to qualify for poverty-ending work, which made them perfect patsies for poverty-sustaining work. And with those low-end feminized occupations, what they had learned to do was to come to the workforce development centers. They knew a couple of things. Like one, they knew that if you're on welfare here in Minnesota at the time and you turn down any job, you can lose benefits. So they would come and do job fairs at the welfare centers, and knowing that they basically, if they offered you a job and you were there, that that you would have to take it, that it could be a problem if you didn't take it. So what was happening is that women were looping in and out of these food service jobs, low-end healthcare jobs, low-end retail jobs. They were looping in and out of them. They would work one for a while, and because of childcare and other issues, they would lose that job, and then they would have to be put right back into another. And now they're on the treadmill, the poverty treadmill, and that never ends. The only thing that disrupts that is not the things we typically think of like trying to make those jobs better. I get the inclination to want to make those jobs better, but I think the better inclination for me was to make sure that our women who have kids qualify for something more than those jobs in the first place, because they're not going to be enough to pay people. So I actually took a big interest in high school and making sure that we were offering things to students in high school that helped make them become more qualified for better jobs. And then that just kind of opened the door for looking at all of education and K-12. And I was having my own experience as a worker. I was having my own experience as a dad who wanted my kid to do better than I had did. And I was also having an experience as an emerging activist. Like, I was starting to see what's the calling here. What's the thing that I actually really want to work on to change the world? Can't change everything. You can't, I can't like be involved in everything. I know I'm not an educator. I know I'm not going to run a school or start a school. I know that there's a lot of things I'm not going to qualify to do. But one thing I can do for sure is make sure that I raise my voice in a way and in a place that makes a difference for people that I actually really think need more help. What happened in the interim in all of this was that I ran for school board. I won. I got on a school board, and I learned so much in 4 years. I learned the way that the business runs. I learned the way that the special interest runs. I learned about just how much kids are an afterthought to the institution. I learned just how much it's not really about kids. It's really not about me, the parent, at that point. It wasn't about my kid who I wanted to do better at that point. It wasn't about our hopes and dreams. It really was a business. So I always laugh when I see public education supporters say things like, education shouldn't run like a business. Education runs exactly like a business. And it's not because there are corporate outsiders that are trying to make it that way. It's because it is a very large institution with many inputs and outlays, many revenues and expenditures. It is a business. It's a corporation, and a superintendent, like it or not, is something akin to a CEO. And it is not always in the best interest of the decisions made are not always in the best interest of the people that should be receiving the service. And while I was on that board, I got every kind of attack that you could possibly get. I got all of the sellout, Uncle Tom, or black militant, or it was right to left. Whoever you disagreed with or whoever you didn't give what they wanted would have artful ways of trying to completely demean and discount the work that you do, the work that I did. I learned a lot about interacting with the public. I learned a lot about where the social power is in educational politics. I learned a lot about how marginalized people become marginalized. Like how you are marginalized, how parents are marginalized out of the educational equation when it comes to schooling and public schools. Now, all these years later, I do this on this is my daily work. I actually get to, not I am doing, I get to go to sleep every night and wake up every morning thinking about the least of these, thinking about the people that need more opportunity than they're getting. Thinking about what the practical reality is when you don't graduate high school capable of doing something. And if you backwards plan for that, all of the things that we care about, racial strife, all the things that we care about, like social justice, racial strife, parity within the economy, improving our representation in certain occupations in certain fields, making progress and making gains for people that have historically been oppressed. All of those things, I think, have trails, breadcrumbs, going back to school, going back to K-12 education. And even within K-12, we just know a certain set of things. I believe these things. I'm not saying that everybody agrees that this is the case, but I can say this much. We know that if you graduate um, not fully like ready, that you burn up your Pell Grant if you do go to college. If you do even make it there, your first year you're getting remediation and you're burning up your Pell Grant, and you're remediating more than you're actually being educated. We know that a certain set of things about middle school. One of the things is that we're just getting it wrong. We know that middle school is hard. We're getting it wrong. All hell breaks loose, especially for Black kids, especially for Black boys in the sixth, seventh, or eighth grade. And that's for a number of reasons. We know that if you're not doing certain levels of math by eighth grade, that a lot of the predictors for your life change. We know that if you're not reading by second, third, or fourth grade in any meaningful way, that there's also some statistical predictors of where you're going to end up in life. We know that that it's really like our best prepared, brightest African Americans that lose the most ground the moment that they enter the public education system. I think programs like Head Start are wildly successful in some cases, but the effect of the success that they have wears off by about the second or third grade, and we blame Head Start for that. We don't often pay attention to the fact, but wait a second, Head Start gave these kids to the system better prepared than the others. So if those benefits wear off by the second or the third grade, that's not a function of Head Start or early ed. That's a function of what happens in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. So bottom line is, I have thought about these things deeply, and I think about them constantly, and I've learned things, I've studied things, I've made myself become a thinking citizen, a person who's an activist, but not a mindless activist. I'm clear about what I'm not. I'm clear about the fact that I am not the scholar. I'm not the person who is writing books of great import that are changing the way that we do practice and pedagogy in schools. I realize that that's not my role. But I do have a fairly serious commitment to thinking that my life is about working in service of the people who have been in the position that I've been in, which is the service industry workers, families that are economically insecure because they are being X'd out of opportunities. And those opportunities are not open to them specifically because the lack of education, the things that they don't have. And if that's all that God has gave me, I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to do what God tells me to do, and I'm going to raise my voice about it. So my entire point here is, if you're one of the people that want to come at me for my ideas and say they're wrong, my ideas about school choice are wrong, I'm happy about that, because I have no ego investment in being right or wrong in those things. I just have ego investment in whether or not our kids and our families succeed, like whether or not something helps them do better than what they're doing right now. I care about results and outcomes. I don't care about how we get there. So I don't mind the intellectual debate. I don't mind if we all treat each other like intelligent people. I don't mind that we have disagreements. What I do mind is, you don't get to ascribe our differences in opinion to my being something other than human, something other than being a thinking person, something other than being intelligent. You don't get to ascribe all of my ideas to white masters or billionaires. I've been in nonprofit work for 20 years. Nonprofit people need to stick together, whether they agree or not on the policies or the issues, period, because I do think that nonprofit work is legitimate work. It is a legitimate sector that serves communities, families, children, and raises up needs that politicians and other people don't see all the time. And they attend to needs that the regular systems don't. So I don't actually believe that nonprofit work should ever take dings for the funding that you get. And if we are being serious, anybody who brings that sort of criticism to me is being funded by somebody too. This idea that some of our critics, the critics of ed reform, the critics of people that want to see serious changes to the system, are somehow inauthentic and not real because they accept certain types of funding. It's just a dog that doesn't hunt, right? We should start actually putting it all on the table. Who funds your nonprofit to fight against the work that we want to happen in the world? Who funds the Schott Foundation? Who funds the salary of the CEO of the Shot Foundation who makes $100,000 more than I do a year? Who funds the Opportunity to Learn campaign? Who funds the Center for Popular Democracy? Who funds Journey for Justice? Where does the money come from for the people that spend so much of their time, their daily time, fighting people like us? Is there funding from some artisanal well of clean money that comes through certain billionaires, but it's the good billionaires, and somehow everybody else is funded by the bad billionaires? Again, it's a dog that doesn't hunt. Let me wrap just by saying this. I think if you're a reform person, if you're a person who has serious or strong ideas about changing the educational system, and you face these kind of cheap, low-level, trolling type of behaviors from people who disagree with you, I think you should stop taking it on the chin. I think you should stop acting as if the work that you do is invalid. I think you should stop trying to find common ground with people that don't want you to exist in the first place. I think you should straighten your back. You should stand up for yourself. I think you should search your soul, because if this is work that you're doing for any reason other than it's core to your values and your self-concept, then you should get out of it. If it's true what the people say about you, then you should get out of it. But if it's not true, you should fight. Because when they take you out, or they take you down a peg, or they take you down a level, it's not you that they're taking out. It's all the people that you are working to make life better for. It's all the people that you are trying to help. So if I can say anything to you today, this was kind of like a rant for me. I don't get to do this often. It's a rant for me. And it's partially because I'm really fed up. I'm fed up with the idea that we have to be talking about who funds us, where the money comes from, whether or not we're shills or sellouts or pimps, or name anything. School board member in Nashville called me a paid whore. An old white guy this week called me Uncle Tom. There are people that call me a shill constantly. It's always the same group of people too, like older white people who have pensions, who are invested in the system of failure, the system that is failing the people that I really care about. And they don't spend any time on the real issue. So this is the real issue to me. The real issue is we don't know how to do school. We don't know how to educate. When people say we know what to do, but we just don't have the resources to do it, they're lying. They don't know how to educate Black children or brown children. The system was never set up to do that. The system is not failing. They are right. When Diane Ravitch or others say that the system isn't failing, they are right. You have heard this a million times. It's not failing. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to sort kids by race and income, and to make sure that certain kids get on the pathway to prosperous lives, and other kids get on the pathway to either working for them or being jailed by them. That's the reality. The stark reality is our teachers don't know how to teach reading. And if you don't learn to read, it has lifelong consequences. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that teachers don't know how to teach. I'm saying the science says that. I'm saying the research tells us that. I'm saying that people who aren't concentrating on the personal issues of education reformers and their lives and their lifestyles, people who aren't distracted by that, are the people who are studying things like, how do we teach reading? How do we teach math? How do we use the workday or the school day to the best benefit of the kids? How do we staff? How do we use time? How do we use our budget? How do we spend the money that we get? How much emphasis should we put on special education? Are we putting too many kids in it or too few kids in it? Those are the real issues of education. So I know a person is not serious if they're concentrating on who funds me. If the most you have to say, and I'm going to end with this, because I feel like I don't know who said this in history, but this is really important. You pray to God that all your critics are as ridiculous as mine. Like, please, God, make all of my critics this ridiculous. Make them people who have nothing to offer or say about how we educate kids, have nothing to offer or say about what goes down in classrooms in terms of practice and pedagogy, have them nothing to offer and to say about the science of reading, whether or not we should be doing direct instruction because it helps more kids, anything that's germane to actually educating kids. Please make them people who say things openly like, the moment that a kid is poor, it changes everything and there's nothing you can do for them. Because if that's who you send for me, to come for me and come for my head, I have a natural advantage on all of them. And my advantage is this: I don't care about the personality politics. I really care about all the things I just mentioned. The educational science that's before us. Science tells us that our teachers are biased towards kids, that they see Black kids as older than they actually are, that they adultify them, that they punish them more harshly. That's not me. Scholars say that. That's what the research says. The research tells us that what I said earlier, that Black kids who are the most prepared lose the most ground in the earliest grades. That's not me. The more of these research studies that you can layer on top of each other, you have to come away with the idea that the system is rigged. So if you're blaming children and their condition and their economic status and their parents and their woeful lack of two white college educated parents, or their woeful lack of proximity to white people, if you're doing that before you have fixed all the other problems first, it tells me that you're not serious. Because everything that you say about poverty could be true, but there is nothing about the poverty of Black children that is making higher ed institutions turn out teachers that can't teach kids to read. There's nothing about the poverty of a family that is turning out principals that don't know how to schedule a school day or support teachers or be instructional leaders. There's nothing about the poverty of children that are causing all of the things within the system that tell us that the system is rigged. So God bless you if you are doing this work every day, if you are waking up and you're sticking to your guns, if you are fighting the good fight, and if you're not taking any losses from people, any crap from people for your motives, for your intentions, why you do this. Too many of the people on our side of the fence are silent every day. They don't speak up for themselves. They say things like, well, you know, that's not productive or whatnot. Meanwhile, the other team is turning the public against you with some pretty nasty narratives and unfair ways of characterizing the work that you are doing and that you want to be done. If you have watched this rant, thank you. If you do this kind of work, thank you. If you are my brother and sister in arms, meaning you're my comrade, this is the way you believe, this is the way you see the work, and you're not going to be pushed back. You're not even going to let your own people call you out your name and be obstacles and barriers to your work. If you really do believe that you have a calling for doing this work every day, and when I say this work, I want to be specific. The work of challenging systems that are heavily invested in staying the same, that employ many people who are not getting the job done that they should get done. If you are putting yourself out front to address that, then I'm with you. That is really hard work. The system will fight back. It has many foot soldiers. They will come for you. And the way that you behave when they come for you says everything about your character and your soul and how much you are in this mission. I've got 20 years now of interacting with people that don't like my mission, and they come from the right and the left. They don't like social services. They don't like the way that we seek to help families. They don't like our policies, our politics, whatever it is. And I agree that my politics are complicated. That is part of the job. That's going to happen. And if that burns you out, by all means, leave. But God bless those of you who are the workers, the ones who are going to keep at this work and keep doing it. Christina Laster, I see you. God bless you too, my sister. I love your message. Thank you. And you keep doing the work. The reason Christina and I know each other, the reason Gwen Samuel and I know each other, the reason that Charles Cole and Ray Ankrum and Sharif and my entire crew of folks, David and Shantae and Andrew, I could keep going down the list of people that I've met over time who have created a fabric, a patchwork of people that are in network with each other that believe the same thing, which is that we can be doing much better for our kids, and not we can be, that we should demand that we do better for all of our kids. Thank you very much for listening to my rant. Thank you if you left a message, and thank you for the comments and the likes of this particular rant. It's an end of the week opportunity for me just to kind of dump my brain. I had some really good conversations this week with great people. I thank God for allowing me to do work that is personally meaningful every day and that I think does matter in the world. And the one thing that I want to say to you is be encouraged, be strong, stand up straight, stay focused, and may the peace of the Lord be with you.